Welcome back, everybody. We are going to today be finishing up our section on relational development. And to do that, we're going to be talking about Mark Knapp's stages of relational development, or also known as the social intercourse model. And let me pop up my PowerPoints and see what I can't do. I'm going to apologize ahead of time. I have I have a meeting that I may have to pause our recording, and I may have to do that in a hurry. So if there are some weird cuts in places, that's what was going on. Um, let's dive right in. So rather than to, and I explained this a little bit last time, rather than to have one really long video talking about the remainder of in part two of what we had to cover, I decided to go with two shorter videos sort of at the end. So I anticipate that today will be a little bit shorter as well. Um, we're going to talk about Knapp's stage model of relational development. And the first and very important thing that I hope you understand from all this is that this is actually not, we're going to talk about half the stage model today. Most of the relational development stuff that we've been talking about has been talking about sort of the building of relationships. Like, so as relationships are forming, as they're getting stronger, as you're getting to know a person, as your feelings and intimacy are developing in a romantic relationship, um, that's been the half of relationships that we've sort of been talking about. We are going to later in this term talk about relational disillusion, so breaking up, that sort of thing. We're just not quite there yet. So we're actually only going to talk about half of Knapp's social intercourse model today. The first half, the building of relationships. So there are five stages. Yep, five stages that we're going to be talking about. And Knapp draws very heavily, I'll tell you, on Altman and Taylor's social penetration theory, the first theory we talked about in our relational development sequence. Knapp works on this and focuses on this a great deal. So many of the stages are sort of defined by self-disclosive behavior and changes in self-disclosive behavior. With that said, he comes down with a slightly different take than does social penetration theory. And we're going to talk about each of these five things in turn: initiating, experimenting, intensifying, integrating, and bonding. Okay. So the stages of relational development, we start with the initiating stage. And I want to point out that this can be an incredibly short stage. This can last as long as 15 to 20 seconds. Sometimes you move on from that right after those 15 or 20 seconds. What happens during this phase is we sort of make some judgments about the people we meet. And we make a judgment about whether or not these folks are going to be the kind of people that are good for us to interact with. Whether they are the sort of folks that are going to be the kind of people that we want to hang out with, and whether we want to pursue a relationship with them in the initiating stage. There has been quite a bit of research on this. There was a researcher, her name was Nalini Ambuddy, and she was a social psychologist, brilliant social psychologist, and her work focused on how people make inferences about another person on the basis of observing only very thin slices of their behavior, right? So you just see a little sketch of a person, and in that time, people are pretty well able to, develop some opinions about that person and make some judgments about them. This is we do this very efficiently and very quickly, and we kind of filter out, these are the people I'm interested in pursuing a relationship with, and these are the people who probably I'm not. What's the initiating stage? There's probably all the self-disclosure at this level is very surface level, right? It's very outside of the onion kind of things. It may be primarily nonverbal. In fact, in many cases, it usually is primarily nonverbal. And so, like the self-disclosures that you're making, in many ways you're making to everybody. Everybody can see them, and they may not even be intended for the target that is in the stage with you, right? So that's the initiating stage. In the experimenting stage, in some relationships, we decide, eh, we'd kind of like for this relationship to go a little farther, right? We'd like for this relationship to kind of move past just where we're at right now. So, um, in order to kind of learn about a person's rough edges, to see how see what it's okay to talk about, see what it's what parts of this person they are willing to open up about, and which parts of this person they're not willing to open up about. We experiment with them. And one of the most common ways that we do this is to flirt with a person. And I would point out that this is not just romantic relationships wherein flirting occurs. For those of you who are guys in the room, although you would never would have, I'm going to blow your mind. Just sit back. You probably would not have called it flirting, but you do exactly the same thing. Groups of guys who get together and hang out, what do? They give each other a hard time. They mess with each other. They tease each other. What are they doing? They're kind of exploring the bounds. How far can I push this relationship and have it be okay between this person? If I can push it really far and have it be okay between myself and this other person, um, we have a pretty good sense that we can start to intensify the relationship. On the other hand, if I push this person just a little bit and they hate what I'm doing to them, they despise me, well, our relationship is probably not all that strong. And maybe it could just be an area, one part of this person that I have to kind of leave alone, or it could just be that we don't have a whole lot of future together as a friend, right? Um, I can't remember for sure if to you guys I've talked about my friends Doug and Pete. When I lived in Columbus, we had neighbors that lived just right down the street from us. Their names were uh, Doug and Lindsay, and then Gretchen and Pete also lived a couple streets north. Okay. And Doug and Lindsay and Gretchen and Pete um, all, still are great friends of Jen and mine. Um, and we are, the guys often go and hang out. We do a guys weekend. This last year we went to Cleveland and hung out in Cleveland and went to the beer festival in Cleveland and had hangovers together after the beer festival in Cleveland. Really good friends, right? And we give each other a relentless hard time. It's just what we do, right? We love to tease one another. I can't think of anything this is ultimately other than flirting. None of us are, of course, romantically interested in the others. We're all, happily married to our wives, but that describes our behavior with one another. We give each other a hard time. We tease each other. I think of the kinds of things that I did with Jen when we were starting our relationship. Yeah, it's actually that never stopped. I just never stopped flirting with my wife, which is to say, I never stopped giving her a hard time. I still do. Um, and it simply serves a different purpose at this point. So yeah, this is the sort of thing that absolutely happens. And sometimes, every once in a while, us guys, we take it too far. There was this is several years ago now. Liam was in kindergarten and he's going into seventh grade now. So you do the math, however many years ago that was. There was an art show that was going on at the kids' elementary school, and all three of us families were there. And there was some lemonade that I had picked up, and I was watching the kids who were doing watercolors, and I did not see Doug sneak up behind me. And Doug sneaks up behind me, and he reaches around, and as hard as he can, he punches me right in the gut. And unfortunately, I did not see this coming or expect it, and for that reason, spill, spilled my lemonade all over this poor little girl and her artwork. Her parents were so pissed, like beyond pissed, like steam coming out of ears, pissed at me, and because they hadn't seen Doug punch me, um, and I was frankly just mortified and terrified that this
I
was.
don't know what that
Oh,
means.
sorry,
If you like, I can
Siri.
search the web for.
Siri needs to go away. Sorry about that. Um, I was just mortified that this had happened, and I was so angry at Doug, and I just walked out of there. After that, Doug comes sheepishly over to my house because we live right down the street from one another. His head's down. He's like drawing things in the sand with his foot. He says, "I apologize. That was not very nice of me. I apologize to that family, and I let them know it was entirely my fault." It was a very kind thing for Doug to do. It was also the right thing for him to do in this particular circumstance. But in doing that, Doug was able to determine how far was too far, and that was too far. Ultimately, he was just trying to mess with me, right? he he didn't mean for anything bad to happen. Something bad did happen, and not super bad, but bad enough. And he learned kind of a little bit about the extent of what our relationship was. Now, I also said after that, no, don't worry about it, Doug. I know what you were trying to do, and there's nothing wrong with you trying to do that thing. I appreciate your apology, though, and I think we're we will make it past this, you and I, and we have. But that's what we're trying to do when we flirt. We experiment with a relationship. We push a relationship. We see how far it can go. We look to see what are the edges of what I can talk about with you. What are the edges of how I can be with you? How much of me being a terrible person are you willing to put up with, right? And when it's all in good fun, like when we're flirting, um, we can be pushed pretty far. In the intensifying stage, there are a few things that happen. We're going to talk about secret tests in just a minute. But we see some linguistic changes. So first of all, in the intensifying stage, well, let me put it this way. As I mentioned in the previous, pardon me, in the previous stage, in the experimenting stage, there's kind of a diverse set of relationships that can actually land in this phase. Um, they can be friendships, they can be same sex, completely not with no possibility, not as if there aren't same sex romantic relationships. There are, and that's totally fine. But what I'm trying to say is that there are experimenting in the experimenting phase. It can encompass all kinds of friendships, um, even friendships whose natural end would never be to develop into a romantic relationship. Okay. um, in the intensifying phase, it is fairly rare that we're not moving toward some sort of romantic relationship. um, all that to say, we tend to see then in this phase a little bit more of a spur off of some of the a little bit broader group that could be in the experimenting phase. That's not to say there aren't some intensifying things that happen among very close friendships. I would say that Doug and I have had, and Pete as well, have had moments where we're having more intense sort of conversation that would be associated with or disclosing things that are a little bit more core to who we are um, in this phase. And I don't think I'm probably infatuated with Doug or Pete, but I do like them very much. They are, despite Pete being a Buckeye, I still like him, which speaks to how good of a person he really must be, because I usually really dislike Buckeyes. Not because I'm a Wolverine fan at all, just because I dislike Buckeyes. Um, in this intensifying phase, we'll see secret tests. We'll talk about that in just a moment. We see linguistic changes. With a romantic partner, we tend to refer to ourselves in the plural rather than in the singular. Um, and we tend to see this be where sort of infatuation, like a really strong focus on the other. Um, we also find ourselves in position where we're really trying to seek affinity with our partners. Um, so we engage in these affinity seeking strategies, things like looking our best all the time, wearing makeup, deodorant, shaving once in a while, trying to look attractive so that the other person will like you, right? Doing those sorts of things. Um, so we're gonna move past this, and we're gonna talk secret tests. I'm actually gonna pop all of these different types of secret tests up, and I will then I actually have to flip open my notes for some of these. Give me just a moment, and I'll do that. I'm gonna have to end the show and then. Okay, brief change of plans. My meeting that I have to go to, I know it's weird that I have to record on Zoom. I can't pause this and go to my meeting. So what I'm going to have happen is, rather than talking about secret tests, I'll just make a very short part 3, which is the video you're watching now, and we'll finish it up with part 4 later this afternoon. Not a big deal. You'll still get everything. It'll just be separated into 2 videos. Um, and we will return then um, later in the afternoon. You'll probably see them pop up simultaneously, by the way. This will just be why.